What if one of the most misunderstood words in your entire vocabulary has been secretly weighing you down your whole life, and you never even knew it? Today, we're going to completely redefine that concept: holy. It's a word that's been heavily burdened by centuries of baggage, and our big goal? To strip all that away and recover the original, incredibly practical Hebrew understanding of what it actually means to be set apart. So genuinely ask yourself, when you hear the word holy, what's the very first thing that pops into your head? If you're like most of us, it instantly conjures up images of moral perfection, strict spiritual discipline, personal piety, this exhausting standard of being completely sinless. We treat holiness like this impossible moral mountain we're forced to climb through sheer willpower alone. And the weight of constantly striving for that kind of perfection? It's crushing. But what if that whole framework is missing the point entirely? To really grasp what holy was always meant to mean, let me begin with an illustration that captures the idea perfectly. Picture the scene. The year is 1871. Off the coast of Cornwall, England, just beneath the surface at high tide, lay the Black Rocks, a jagged, unforgiving reef, invisible in fog, invisible in darkness, just waiting. For 30 long years, the merchants of Penzance watched helplessly as ships floundered there. 16 entire vessels were lost. 73 souls were claimed by the sea. Finally, in the spring of 1871, a 40-foot tower of dressed stone, iron, and glass was raised on the highest promontory. By December, it was completely finished. But at that exact moment, it was just a building, stone, iron, glass, completely ordinary, and no different from any other structure sitting along that coast. Then came December 18th. 2 men stood at the base of that tower: Thomas Wren, a former fisherman, and 19-year-old Samuel Hodge. An official read them their commission. Henceforth, this station shall be known as St. Anthony's Light, dedicated to the preservation of life at sea. Upon your faithfulness, lives depend. They were handed a great iron key, and in that singular moment, everything changed. The door that had stood open to anyone now bore a lock. Every single item carried up those spiral stairs, the oil, the wicks, the heavy lens, existed for one reason and one reason only. Wren and Hodge couldn't just pack up and leave during a cold winter gale anymore. They were now the keepers of the light. And sure enough, just weeks later, in February 1872, a brutal storm struck. A schooner was being driven straight toward the deadly rocks, but the captain saw the light, spun the wheel hard, and narrowly missed the reef. When they limped into harbor the next morning, the crew didn't say, "We saw a building with a lamp." They said, "St. Anthony's Light saved us." Now, here's the crucial point. The stone, the iron, and the glass of that lighthouse weren't somehow spiritually superior to the rocks around them. But its identity had completely changed, because it was withdrawn from common use and dedicated to a singular, life-saving purpose. That is our paradigm shift, and it's the key to everything. That lighthouse story perfectly illustrates the foundational linguistic core of what we're recovering. The ancient Hebrew root word we translate as holy is Qadosh. Fundamentally, it means to be set apart, distinct, or withdrawn from ordinary use in order to be dedicated to God's use and purpose. And hear this clearly, something that is Kadosh doesn't have to be morally pure. A clay pot can be Kadosh. The Sabbath day is Kadosh. Temple utensils are Kadosh. They aren't morally perfect. They're simply designated. Which brings us to the really massive contrast, the big aha moment. We naturally assume the opposite of holy is wicked or sinful, right? But in the Hebrew mindset, the opposite of kadosh is actually kol, and kol simply means common, ordinary, everyday. That's it. Something that is kol isn't evil at all. A regular cooking fire is kol. Your favorite coffee mug is kol. Perfectly fine for daily use, just not designated for sacred use. Holiness isn't a moral condition. It's a designation. And Scripture consistently shows us that this designation happens in three distinct sequential movements. First is Badal, separation. The object or person is withdrawn from common use, like the lock on the lighthouse door. Second is Malé, filling, because a separated vessel is just an empty shell until it's filled with purpose, presence, or equipping. The keepers were given their keys, their oil, their wicks. Third is Avad, service. The vessel has to actually do what it was designed to do. The light has to shine. Without Avad, separation and filling are just unfulfilled potential. All three absolutely must be present. Lacking any one of them, the vessel is incomplete. Here's what's remarkable. This pattern of Badal, Malé, and Avad isn't some later invention for priests in a temple. It's woven into the very fabric of the universe from the very beginning. Look at Genesis 1 through this lens. In days 1 through 3, God is performing Badal. He separates light from darkness, water from sky, land from sea. He's drawing boundaries, creating structure. Then, in days 4 through 6, he performs Malé. He fills those separated spaces, the sky with the sun, the moon, and birds, the sea with fish, the land with animals and humanity, given the mandate to steward and serve all of it. That's Avad. And then day 7 arrives. God doesn't just call it good, as he has the other days. He pronounces it Qadosh, holy. Not because Saturday is somehow morally superior to Thursday. That would be absurd. He pronounces it holy because the entire process is finally complete. Creation is separated, filled, and functioning exactly as intended. Functional alignment is the true root of holiness in the universe. Now look at Isaiah's absolutely awe-inspiring throne room vision in chapter 6. He suddenly finds himself in God's presence, and the sheer, expansive holiness of God is pressing outward, filling everything. And Isaiah completely panics. He yells out, "Woe is me, for I am undone." He immediately recognizes his own common, whole existence colliding with ultimate Qadosh reality. He knows he doesn't belong there. He's like a fish out of water. He doesn't start listing his good deeds or trying to act spiritual. He just utterly falls apart. But look at how God responds to that panic. A seraph flies over with a burning coal from the altar and presses it to his lips. Now catch this. The coal itself isn't a moral agent. It's an instrument of God's fire that purifies him. And more importantly, God initiates the entire thing. Holiness wasn't some ladder Isaiah had to climb to prove himself. God actively cleansed him with fire from his altar, separating and filling him. And literally the second Isaiah is purified, what happens? God asks, "Who will go for us?" And Isaiah answers, "Here I am. I'm now ready to go. Send me." The Avad, the service, happens instantly. It flows completely from his separation and his filling. His purification wasn't so he could sit in a corner and feel super spiritual. It was a direct commission for a vital task. The entire point of him being made holy was so that he could be sent out with a purpose. So if holiness is about purpose and designated boundaries, what happens when we ignore those boundaries? This is where it gets serious. Prepare for the most misunderstood story in the whole of Leviticus. Aaron's sons, Nadab and Abihu, bring unauthorized fire before the Lord, and fire consumes them. We naturally read this with Western legalistic eyes and assume they committed some horrific moral sin and God struck them down in punishment. But that's a misreading. The Hebrew word for the fire they brought is zar, foreign, strange. It wasn't evil fire. It was just whole fire, ordinary, common, everyday fire. Perfectly fine for a cooking hearth, completely unauthorized for the altar. They collapsed the boundary between the common and the holy. They treated what was sacred as if it were simply mundane. As Moses explains to Aaron right there in the text, "By those who come near me, I will be treated as holy." God wasn't acting like a petty rule enforcer. Nadab and Abihu encountered the catastrophic, inherent consequence of crossing a dangerous boundary. You don't step off a curb into moving traffic and get punished by the car. You simply face the built-in reality of what that boundary means. You cannot substitute the common for the sacred. So if this definition is so clear and functional, how on earth did we end up with the moral mountain? It comes down to translation. When the Hebrew scriptures were translated into Greek, Qadosh became Hagios. And Greek philosophy loved abstraction. It constantly separated the physical from the spiritual, the material from the moral. Over centuries, what was originally a concrete, communal, vocational understanding of holiness, being set apart for a shared corporate purpose, drifted into a stressful, highly individualized, abstract moral checklist. In short, we replaced purpose with personal purity. The pastoral fallout from that shift is real. It produces perpetual performance anxiety, never quite feeling good enough. And that pressure forces people into one of two directions: crushing legalism, doubling down on rules to compensate, or despairing antinomianism, throwing up their hands and giving up entirely. In both cases, we lose our true vocation. We stop seeing ourselves as commissioned keepers of the light and start seeing ourselves as permanent moral improvement projects. But the biblical reality flips this entirely. Listen to how God addresses his people. In Exodus 19:6, "You shall be to me a kingdom of priests and a holy nation." And the Apostle Peter echoes it directly. "You are a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, that you may proclaim the excellence of him who called you." Notice the sequence. He doesn't say, if you act perfectly, you might become a holy nation. He declares the identity first. You are already a holy nation, not because you earned it, but because he claimed you. Identity precedes behavior. Calling determines conduct. You don't do good things to become holy. You do good things because you already are holy. Just as Wren and Hodge maintained the light, trimmed the wicks, and stood watch through the storm, not in order to become lighthouse keepers, but because they already were lighthouse keepers. Does moral behavior matter? Absolutely, without question. But we have to get the flow right. Identity is the root. You are claimed and set apart by God. Moral behavior is the fruit, living consistently with who you already are. Those moral commands stop feeling like arbitrary hoops to jump through and begin revealing themselves as wisdom for how a set-apart people can truly flourish together. And what happens when a keeper fails? When you fall short? A lighthouse keeper who falls asleep on watch doesn't instantly cease to be a keeper. They're just an unfaithful keeper who needs to wake up, confess, and return to their post. The calling remains. God's claim on you stands firm. And remember, this was never meant to be carried alone. We are not isolated moral projects, just as a single lighthouse functions within a wider network of beacons to make an entire coastline navigable for sailors. Holiness is meant to be lived out collectively. We are a set-apart people together, bearing each other's burdens, keeping the light burning through the storm when one of us is struggling to hold on. Thomas Wren and Samuel Hodge worked in pairs for a reason. The winter gales were too brutal, the task too demanding to carry alone. So here's where we land. You are not an impossible moral mountain to be climbed. You are not a permanent project in need of constant fixing. You are not a moral achievement waiting to happen. You are a commissioned servant. You have been separated from the ordinary. You are being filled with purpose, and you are called to serve. This isn't a standard you're forced to achieve through sheer willpower. It's a vocational reality you've already been given. You are the lighthouse on the promontory, claimed, equipped, and commissioned. So the question I want to leave you with is this. If holiness isn't a terrifying moral mountain that you have to climb through sheer effort, but an identity and a purpose already declared over you by the one who made you, how will you serve the light? Badal, Malé, Avad. This is who you are.
If you found this video helpful, please support the channel. If you're watching on YouTube, hit that like button and consider subscribing. It really helps the channel grow. And if you're watching this on our website, thank you for visiting. You can find links to our related articles at the bottom of the page.